In this lesson, we're going to talk about some of the ways in which we can utilize the depth fade contour shader. So what this shader will allow us to do is create contour lines that can actually change their color based on their distance or proximity to the camera. So in order to set this up, what we first need to do is take a look inside the render settings. We need to first make sure that we have contour rendering enabled, and because this is a more complex contour rendering system, we do need to make sure that we have our custom contrast and store shaders plugged in the render settings. Alright, so once you have these things done, then we can apply the depth fade contour shader. So let's take a look over in the hypershade. In our case, we have our Lambert 2, which is assigned to our materials or our objects over here. So let's take a look inside the contour shader. So let's scroll down, there we go. And we're going to drop in the contour shader depth fade. So let's drop this in, and we'll plug this into the shading group. So let's go ahead and expand the metal ray tab, scroll down to the contour shader, and plug in the depth fade right into the contour shader port. Now before we render, let's take a look at a couple of options that are found on this depth shader. What we first have the ability to do is control the color of the contour lines at a certain proximity to the camera. Right now this is set up to where once we reach about 10 units away from the camera, the color will be this green color that we've defined. And we also have the ability to control the width based on the distance to the camera. So we'll have a width of about 2 units. Now once this object, or once any part of this object reaches around 25 units away from the camera, we'll now switch to this color and this width, and we'll actually have a fading effect between the two. So before I actually hit render, let's take just a moment, and if you open up the scene file that I have already set up for us, I actually do have a locator that's set up in this scene. So this is a really quick and easy way of basing a object, or rather a portion of your scene, to a certain distance. So let's go ahead and go up to display. We'll turn on the heads up display, and we'll enable the object details. So as long as I have this actual locator selected, we can see its distance from the camera right up in this little attribute. So let's come in. I'll switch to a top view, and I'll move this until we hit an area that is very close to the camera. You can see right now this locator is very close to the camera. Right now it's at about 2 units away. So that will be our closest distance. And once we get back here to this point that's furthest away as far as the actual orientation of the camera is concerned, you can see now we're at about 15 units away. So let's remember those values. So for the near distance, you can put in -2. You can really put in either a positive or a negative number. It really won't make any difference as far as the actual calculation is concerned. So this will be the closest point. For our maximum distance, we'll put in 15. So now let's take a render at what we have. And you can see now we have the contour lines that are set up in our scene, and they can actually fade based on their color. So right now you can see that we actually do have contour lines on all of our objects. So if you recall up from our lesson dealing with the actual contour contrast shader, what we'll have to do is take a look inside the utilities, find our actual contrast shader, and make sure we disable the difference index, which will keep every polygon from having a contour line placed around it. There we go. So now that will keep every polygon from having a line, although you will see that a lot of our lines have now disappeared. So it may be necessary to find this in delta, or rather the maximum angle of our contour lines, and drop this down to something a little less than 90 degrees, or whatever the case may call for in your situation. You can see that we do have a lot of 90-degree sharp angles in this. So we'll set this to just below 90 degrees. And now that'll give these contour lines a little bit higher sensitivity. And you can see now we're getting something very close to what we want. Now, as I mentioned, we do have the ability to control these contour lines based on their distance. So if I wanted the far width to be a little bit narrower, so that way these lines would get a little bit thinner as they got further away in distance, we can do that. And we can also change the color based on their proximity as well. So if I wanted these forward-facing lines to be a little bit more on the red side, we can do that as well. And there we go. Now you can see that these lines that are closest to the camera are red and have a thicker color. And as we get further away, these lines start to get a little bit more on the blue side, and you can see they lose a lot of their thickness as they get further back. Now one thing that you will notice is that we actually do have a drawing error as far as these contour lines are concerned. These lines that should be furthest back are actually being drawn on top of the contour lines that should be in front. You can see how this does start to create some very noticeable problems as far as these overlapping lines are concerned. So right now, this is an error that you'll run into whenever just using these normal contour shaders. However, there is a solution for this, and we'll explore this solution a little bit later as we actually get down into some of these contour output nodes. So if you want to learn how to fix this rendering error, you can take a look at our lesson on dealing with the contour composite node. Alright, so that's a look at how we can utilize this contour shader depth fade as a way of creating these really nice contour lines that have the ability to alter themselves based on their proximity to the camera.